Dear colleagues, let us introduce ourselves. My name is Ingridda Vaňková, and together with Professor Magdaléna Bilá, we are going to present you our view on one of the current issues dealt with within translation studies and translator study, that is translator and cattle interaction, and the role of hermeneutic understanding, conceptualization, and translanguaging in that interaction. The focal point of our current research interest is the linguistic landscape of tourist spots. Specifically, we are going to examine popular versions of tourist notices from the perspective of translation and translator studies. Our present study draws on the research into the conceptualization examined in our monograph, co-authored with a colleague of ours, and on the research into the translation of popular versions of tourist notices, which has already been recognized by other scholars in their research in current contents journals. As the reality of translation industry and market shows, professional translators do face mental load on everyday basis. The mental load characteristic of translator profession may grow to challenging amount due to client expectations, issues related to technological aids and information sources mastering, tasks related to writing and editing, and due to continual search for balance between concerns of loyalty to the source text and search for high-quality target text meeting target audience expectations. In present study, we build on Pim's argument that the translation process, whether from scratch or a machine translation, comprises three phases. These are problem recognition, generation of alternatives, and final selection of translation solutions. We agree with Pim that on the one hand, machine translation can considerably accelerate the second stage. On the other hand, it may prevent the translator from a holistic perception of the translated text. Therefore, the following question arises: how much do these tools actually diminish the mental load? When searching for the answer to the posed question, one has to realize that there is a possibility that these tools may prevent the translator from a holistic perception of the translated text. Moreover, the survey on the issue reveals numerous comments made by professional translators, pointing on the fact that the language technology tools are needlessly limiting their creative autonomy. Even in machine translation involving human-cattle interaction, it is necessary to bear in mind, as one of the scholars argues, the most distinctive trait of human translation is its creativity, for translation involves choices that are not determined by preset rules. At the same time, it is inevitable to consider undesired impact of machine translation and translator and cattle interaction. As Todorova claims, text types which require a lower level of creativity are less influenced by the unfavorable impact of CAT tools. In our present research, we approach tourist notices from the perspective of translation and translator studies. We draw on the concept of translanguaging, and we assume that a CAT tool-generated translation, which is not supplemented by human conscious knowledge and experience-based act, is insufficient and may result in improper translation. This conscious knowledge and experience-based act includes lingua-culturally rooted pre-understanding, conceptualizing, and configuring. We also assume that in order to achieve target-orientedness regarding the target culture conventions, a hermeneutic conceptualization configuration method-based microanalysis is of assistance. The present analysis is aimed at recognizing the inevitability of pragmatic adaptations. These are justified by conceptualization of culture-bound differences. Now, let me comment on hermeneutic conceptualization configuration method, A translation method developed and tested in grant research task focused on the issue of intralingual and interlingual conceptual fluency. It consists of 4 stages. These are cognitive framing, hermeneutic understanding, saliencing, and code configuring. We argue that it may be of assistance in identifying the issues in raw machine translation output that need to be attended to and corrected, and in reducing the number of undesirable preferential changes. The present research is aimed at finding out whether hermeneutic conceptualization configuration method may be deployed in post-editing of raw machine-translated Slovak tourist notices, specifically popular shortened versions of the National Parks rules and regulations. HCCM method on the translation of popular versions of tourist notices and providing certain pragmatic adaptations in order to achieve target audience orientedness, we can identify new challenge in linguistic landscape studies. That is, call for a new perspective combining both conscious, cognitive, and axiological culture-specific evaluative operations in a translator's mind explored through translanguaging, which stands for the deployment of particular features, structures, and even modalities from source language and target language operating as a unitary linguistic repertoire. Within research methodology, the data were obtained from popular versions of tourist notices, which were not the crease from which they are derived, in Slovak 6 national parks out of 7. A tourist notices from 1 tourist spot and 2 tourist websites providing general rules for visitors to national parks. Tourist notices were translated from Slovak language to English language using MateCat. The methods applied comprise analysis of source text functions and hermeneutic conceptualization configuration method. Present analysis draws on the identification of source text function derived from text type as elaborated by Katarina Rice. She distinguishes between the basic text types, their language functions, and text focuses. Source texts with appellative functions are directed primarily at the readership. In source text with informative function, some segments may be identified, the focus of which is the subject matter, as for example features of a national park. Source text intended for translation with occasionally expressive function feature emotionally marked lexis. Within the geosemiotic and sociopragmatic microanalysis of source text functions, Slovak national parks and tourist spots are viewed as globally accessible places, typified by specific social practices related to healthy lifestyle, reasonable leisure time activities, hands-on learning, and practices related to forming and asserting one's own identity and social status. Cognitive framing phase of HCCM method reveals that Slovak tourist spots together with specific social practice performed there, and notices as territorially restricted signage targeted at the home audience form a specific type of public space with territorially limited linguistic landscape. Slovak tourist notices are to be understood as quasi-legal text derived from the crease as top-down text. However, they are set in the public space with 4 principles applied. The present text is an example of popular versions of tourist notices. The text type being operative with an appellative language function. The provided text is an example of top-down text. The analysis of linguistic landscape principles reveals that the principles of good reasons, verbalized through politeness, modality, and persuasive tools, together with the principle of collective identity implied through inclusive we, are backgrounded. Principle of self-presentation articulated through scientific terminology, and the principle of power relations expressed by means of formal language, precisely legalese, and by means of modality are foregrounded. The notice as a source language intended for translation is aimed at creating a social situation in which the value of environment protection is achieved through civic obedience. We may wonder whether it may be referred to as a specific historically embedded lingua-cultural feature. The hermeneutic pre-understanding stage is aimed at geosemiotic and socio-pragmatic anticipation of future target text functions. In this view, target text draws on the assumption that tourist spots are associated with specific social practice and notice or English signage as globally accessible and intelligible text targeted at global audience. These elements in their sum create a specific type of globally accessible public space. The output of the hermeneutic pre-understanding stage of HCCM method is notional delineation of meaning, not yet conceptualized or verbalized. In summary, this stage anticipates semantically intelligible, purposeful, and interculturally functional translation. After applying this stage, the translated notice as a target text is intended to create a social situation in which the value of environment protection is achieved through global community effort. Drawing on the outcome of the stage of hermeneutic pre-understanding, we may pose another question: how to conceptualize the meaning and how to reorder the principles in order for the translation to be globally acceptable and linguistically achievable. The hermeneutic pre-understanding phase reveals the configuration of principles operating in linguistic landscape of tourist spots as a public space. In target text, self-presentation and power relations are backgrounded, while good reasons and collective identity are foregrounded. Now, let me give the floor to my colleague, Professor Bilá, to present analysis of next two stages of hermeneutic conceptualization configuration method and conclusions of our present research in the following video. Thank you for your attention.